The Guardian, a German Shepherd's Last Mission. Part 1, A New Beginning. The sound of tires crunching on gravel echoed through the quiet countryside as a dark blue truck pulled into the driveway of a modest suburban home. The air was crisp, the scent of pine trees lingering from the nearby forest. Sitting in the passenger seat, staring out the window with sharp, intelligent eyes, was Max, a German shepherd whose days of service had come to an end. James, a former police officer, put the truck in park and exhaled deeply. He glanced at Max, whose ears perked up slightly. "Well, buddy," James said, giving Max a gentle pat on the head. "Welcome home." The door swung open, and Max hesitated for a moment before stepping out. His muscular frame was still impressive, though there was a slight stiffness in his movements, a reminder of the years he had spent on duty. The once black patches of his fur had begun to gray around his muzzle, but his posture remained alert, his instincts still sharp. As he took his first cautious steps on the unfamiliar lawn, the sound of small, excited footsteps echoed from the house. "Dad, is he here?" A young boy, no older than 7, came racing out the front door, his wide blue eyes full of excitement. His curly brown hair bounced with each step as he nearly tripped over his own feet in his rush to reach the truck. "Ethan, slow down," James chuckled, watching his son skid to a stop a few feet away from Max. Ethan's eyes sparkled as he stared at the large dog before him. "He's huge." Max remained still, his gaze fixed on the boy. He had been trained to assess threats, to read body language. But this child, he was no threat, just a bundle of energy and curiosity. "Can I pet him?" Ethan asked eagerly, looking up at his father. James nodded. "Go slow, let him get used to you." Ethan cautiously stepped closer and held out his tiny hand. Max sniffed it briefly before letting out a soft huff. Taking this as a good sign, Ethan's face lit up, and he gently ran his fingers through Max's thick fur. "He's so soft." James smiled, watching the interaction. "Max is a retired police dog. He used to help catch bad guys." Ethan's jaw dropped. "Whoa, like a superhero dog?" James chuckled. "Something like that." Max simply stood there, allowing Ethan's touch, though his posture remained slightly tense. This wasn't a job. There were no commands, no orders to follow. This was something different. Adjusting to a new life, the first few days in his new home were strange for Max. There were no sirens, no barking orders from handlers, no dangerous missions. Just soft carpets, the smell of home-cooked meals, and a young boy who wouldn't stop talking to him. "Come on, Max," Ethan called one afternoon, holding up a bright yellow tennis ball. "Let's play fetch." Max watched the boy toss the ball across the yard. His instincts screamed at him to chase it, but his training had been different. He had been taught discipline, precision, strategy. Fetch wasn't exactly in his skill set. Ethan ran over, picked up the ball, and tried again. "Go get it, Max." Max tilted his head slightly but didn't move. Ethan pouted. "Dad, I think Max is broken." James laughed from the porch. "Give him time, buddy. He's used to a different kind of life." Ethan huffed dramatically and sat down next to Max on the grass. "It's okay," he said, patting Max's side. "Oh, you don't have to play if you don't want to. We can just sit here together." For the first time since arriving, Max felt a strange sense of ease. No pressure, no expectations, just companionship. A silent protector. That night, Max lay on his bed in the corner of Ethan's room, his ears twitching at every small sound. The house was safe. No intruders, no suspicious activity. But old habits died hard. He watched as Ethan slept peacefully, his small chest rising and falling with each breath. The boy had spent the entire day talking to him, telling him stories about school, his favorite cartoons, and how he always wanted a dog. "You're my best friend already, Max," Ethan had said before drifting off to sleep. The words lingered in Max's mind. Best friend? He had been many things, a protector, a soldier, a tool of the law, but a best friend? That was new. As the night deepened, Max rested his head on his paws, eyes half closed but still alert. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted softly. For the first time in a long time, Max wasn't on duty. But deep down, he knew, no matter how much his life had changed, he would always be a guardian. And in this new home, with this little boy who already adored him, he had found a new mission. Part 2, A New Bond. Adjusting to a new life, the morning sun spilled golden light through the windows as the scent of bacon and eggs filled the kitchen. Ethan sat at the table, swinging his legs excitedly while James poured himself a cup of coffee. Can Max have some bacon, Dad? Ethan asked, already reaching toward his plate. James shook his head with a chuckle. Not too much, buddy. He's on a strict diet. Ethan sighed dramatically, but still tore off a tiny piece and held it out. Here, Max. It's just a little treat. Max sat a few feet away, his sharp eyes fixed on the boy's hand. He didn't move, waiting for a command. You can take it, James said simply. Max hesitated, then gently took the bacon from Ethan's fingers, chewing slowly. Ethan grinned. See? He likes it. James nodded, watching the interaction closely. He's still adjusting, Ethan. Remember, Max wasn't raised as a pet. He was trained for discipline, not for belly rubs and snacks. Ethan frowned slightly. But he's part of the family now, right? James smiled. Of course he is. He just needs time to learn that too. A lesson in trust. Later that day, Ethan grabbed his bright yellow tennis ball and ran to the backyard. Okay, Max, let's try again, he announced, holding the ball high. Max watched him carefully, his posture attentive but not playful. Ethan threw the ball as hard as he could. It bounced once, then rolled across the grass. Max didn't move. Ethan groaned, running over to pick it up. Come on, Max. It's just fetch. You don't have to be so serious all the time. James, who had been watching from the porch, walked over. Let me show you something, Ethan. He pulled a small black rubber ball from his jacket pocket, one that looked much more worn and familiar. This was Max's training ball. Back when he worked with me, this was what he played with. James tossed it lightly. This time, Max's ears perked up. His body tensed, muscles coiled, and in a flash, he darted forward, snatching the ball midair before trotting back and dropping it at James's feet. Whoa! Ethan's eyes went wide. James crouched beside his son. Max doesn't understand fetch like most dogs do, but this, he held up the training ball. This was part of his job. It meant work, discipline, rewards. Ethan nodded slowly. So he doesn't play like normal dogs. He just needs to learn how to, James said with a smile. Ethan thought for a moment, then picked up the tennis ball again. What if I make this our special ball? Like your training ball, but just for us. James ruffled his son's hair. That's a great idea, buddy. Ethan held the ball out to Max. This is ours now, okay? Max sniffed it, but made no move to take it. Ethan sighed. Okay, maybe not yet, but I'll keep trying. James smiled proudly, watching as Ethan refused to give up on earning Max's trust. A protector at heart, that night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Max paced the house restlessly. The silence was unfamiliar. No radios, no commands, no sense of duty. He was supposed to relax, but something in him couldn't. James sat on the couch, sipping a beer as he watched Max move. You don't have to be on guard all the time, buddy, he said softly. Max stopped, looking at him with sharp, knowing eyes. James sighed. I get it. You spent your whole life protecting people. It's hard to turn that off, huh? Max blinked but didn't move. James set down his drink and patted the couch. Come on, sit. Max hesitated, then cautiously stepped forward and sat by James's feet. James reached down, scratching behind his ears. You did good out there today, you know. You let Ethan in a little. Max let out a slow breath, resting his head against James's knee. For the first time since retiring, he allowed himself to relax just a little. A test of loyalty. The next day, Ethan had an idea. Dad, can we go to the park? He asked eagerly. I want to take Max. James considered it for a moment. All right, but you have to stay close, okay? Ethan nodded quickly, already grabbing Max's leash. At the park, Ethan ran across the field, tossing his tennis ball over and over, hoping Max would finally play. Max, however, stayed by James's side, watching the boy but never chasing the ball. Ethan sighed. He's still not playing. James smiled. Give it time, bud. Just let him be near you. Ethan nodded and plopped onto the grass. Come here, Max. This time, Max hesitated, but eventually walked over, sitting beside Ethan. Ethan grinned. That's progress. As the afternoon passed, Ethan and Max simply sat together, watching the other kids play. Then suddenly, a sharp scream cut through the air. Ethan's head snapped up. Across the field, a young girl had fallen off the monkey bars. Her mother ran toward her, but she was still a few steps away. Before Ethan could even react, Max was already moving. His instincts kicked in, his powerful legs launching him across the park in seconds. He skidded to a stop beside the girl, sniffing her carefully before looking back at her mother, alert. Ethan and James ran over. Is she okay? Ethan asked. The mother nodded. I think she just scraped her knee, but your dog, he ran to her so fast, like he knew she needed help. James smiled proudly. That's what he does. Ethan knelt beside Max, patting his side. You're a real-life superhero, Max. Max let out a soft huff, his tail wagging just a little. For the first time, he wasn't following orders. He was just doing what felt right. And for the first time, Ethan felt like Max truly belonged to him. Part 3. The Night of Danger. A quiet night, the house was quiet, bathed in the dim glow of the streetlights filtering through the windows. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rustle of leaves outside were the only sounds breaking the silence. James sat in his chair reading a newspaper while Max lay near his feet, his ears flicking slightly at every little noise. Across the house, Ethan was fast asleep, his arm draped over his favorite stuffed animal. It had been a long day. Max had slowly begun to adapt to his new life, and for the first time, he seemed to enjoy just being part of the family. But despite the calm atmosphere, something in Max's instincts wouldn't let him fully relax. His eyes flickered open. A sound, something different, a faint metallic click near the back of the house. Max's ears perked up instantly, his muscles tensed. He waited. Then another sound, the soft creak of a door opening. Someone was there. Intruder in the house, Max was on his feet before James even noticed. The German Shepherd's body moved with silent precision, his head low, ears erect, eyes locked on the dark hallway leading toward the back door. James looked up. What is it, Max? Max didn't move. His entire body was frozen, poised like a coiled spring. Then a faint shadow moved near the hallway. James's instincts kicked in immediately. He set down the newspaper slowly and reached for the drawer next to him, where his old service pistol was locked away. Before he could move, Max let out a deep, guttural growl. Not the usual bark of excitement. This was a warning, a promise. James barely had time to stand before crash! A loud thud came from the kitchen. Stay here, James whispered, but Max was already moving. The dog's powerful legs carried him forward in a blur of motion, his claws clicking against the wooden floor. James followed, heart pounding, face to face with the threat. Max reached in the kitchen first. A man in dark clothing was crouched near the window, his gloved hands gripping a crowbar. A bag slung over his shoulder suggested he had already taken something. Max didn't hesitate. He lunged. The intruder barely had time to react before 80 pounds of muscle and trained instinct crashed into him. The man stumbled back, cursing, swinging the crowbar wildly. Max dodged, his sharp teeth snapping inches away from the intruder's arm. Then a scream. Not from the intruder, from Ethan. The boy stood in the hallway, rubbing his sleepy eyes until he saw the stranger in the house. The man turned, eyes wide, realizing he had been caught. And then he saw Max. The dog was positioned perfectly between the intruder and Ethan, his teeth bared, his body a living shield. Stay back, James shouted, stepping forward, his voice firm. The intruder hesitated. Then in a panic, he turned and bolted toward the back door. But Max was faster. With a powerful leap, he clamped his jaws onto the man's arm, dragging him down with sheer strength. The man screamed, struggling, but Max held firm. James rushed forward, tackling the man to the ground, pinning him. Within seconds, the situation was over. Max stood over the intruder, still growling, his body low, waiting for another move. James pulled out his phone. This is James Carter. I need an officer at my home now. Attempted burglary, suspect restrained. His hands shook slightly, but his voice was steady. The man groaned, still trapped under James's knee. Jesus, that dog's a monster. James smirked. No, he's a hero. Aftermath. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cars painted the street in a rhythmic glow. Officers swarmed the area, taking statements, securing evidence, and loading the handcuffed intruder into the back of a squad car. James stood with Ethan, his hand on his son's shoulder. Ethan hadn't said much since the break-in. His small hands clutched at Max's fur, fingers curled tightly into the thick coat. You okay, buddy? James asked softly. Ethan nodded. He protected me, Dad. He didn't let the bad guy near me. James ruffled his son's hair. That's what he does. One of the officers, a younger man with short blonde hair, approached. James, this guy's got a record. We've been tracking him for a while. You and Max just helped put him away for good. James exhaled. Glad to hear it. The officer glanced down at Max, who was sitting calmly beside Ethan. That's a damn good dog you've got. James chuckled. Yeah, he is. The officer knelt down and reached a hesitant hand toward Max. Mind if I... Max stared at him, unblinking. James smirked. Not unless you want to lose that hand. The officer chuckled and stood. Got it. Well, he did his job tonight. You should be proud. I am, James said, glancing down at Max. I really am. The weight of a promise. As the officers left and the street quieted once again, Ethan remained close to Max's side. The boy knelt beside him, pressing his face into the dog's thick fur. Thank you, Max, he whispered. You saved us. Max simply let out a soft huff, resting his head against Ethan's lap. James crouched next to them. I think you've got yourself a real guardian, kiddo. Ethan smiled, his eyes still shining with admiration. I knew he was special, Dad, from the first day. James nodded, watching as Max closed his eyes, finally allowing himself to rest. For years, Max had lived his life by one rule: protect those who needed him. Tonight, even in retirement, he had proven that some instincts never fade. And as Ethan stroked his fur gently, whispering soft words of gratitude, Max knew this wasn't just a new home. This was his final mission, his true purpose, his family. Part 4. A Hero's Sacrifice. The morning after the sun had barely risen when James stepped onto the porch, a hot cup of coffee in his hands. The events of the night before still lingered in his mind, the sound of breaking glass, the intruder's panic, and the way Max had fought without hesitation. He glanced down. Max was lying on the wooden porch, his body stretched out but alert, his eyes following every movement in the quiet neighborhood. You don't have to keep watch anymore, buddy, James said softly, sitting down on the step beside him. Max flicked his ears, but didn't move. James reached down, scratching behind the dog's ear. You did good last night. Better than good. You saved us. Max let out a soft huff, his tail wagging just slightly. Inside, the sound of small footsteps approached. Ethan appeared at the door, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Morning, Dad, he mumbled. Then spotting Max, he immediately perked up. Morning, Max. He ran over and knelt beside the dog, wrapping his arms around him. You're the best dog in the world. You know that? Max nudged Ethan's face with his nose, his tail wagging a little stronger this time. James watched them, smiling. For the first time he truly saw it, Max wasn't just their protector anymore. He was part of their family. A change in Max. The next few days were peaceful. The town was buzzing with news about the break-in and how a retired Canine had stopped a criminal in his tracks. People at the park stopped to admire Max. Kids pointed at him in awe. Even Mrs. Miller, the elderly baker, had come by with a special dog-friendly treat just for him. But despite all the praise, James began to notice something different. Max wasn't as quick to get up in the mornings. His steps were slower. His movements, once sharp and precise, now had a slight hesitation. Even Ethan noticed. Max doesn't chase the ball as fast anymore, he said one afternoon, frowning. Do you think he's okay? James sighed. He's getting older, bud. That fight took a lot out of him. Ethan knelt beside Max, stroking his fur. You're still the strongest dog ever, right, Max? Max let out a soft grunt, resting his head on Ethan's lap. But James knew. Max had given everything he had left to protect them that night. And now he was tired. The hard truth. One evening, James took Max to the vet for a checkup. Dr. Wilson, their longtime veterinarian, examined Max carefully. She ran her hands along his back, checked his reflexes, and listened to his heartbeat. James could tell from her face before she even spoke. He's slowing down, she said gently. That night took a toll on him, James. He was already in the later stages of his life, but now his body is wearing down faster. James clenched his jaw. How long? Dr. Wilson hesitated. It's hard to say. Could be months, maybe less. James took a deep breath, his fingers gripping Max's collar. The dog looked up at him, his warm brown eyes calm, like he already knew. Last war. That night, James didn't tell Ethan the full truth. He simply said Max needed more rest, and that they had to be gentle with him. Ethan, being only 7, didn't fully understand. Okay, Max, he said brightly. We'll rest together. The next morning, James took Max on one last long walk. The two of them strolled through the quiet town, past all the familiar places. The park, the bakery, the old police station where Max had once stood proudly beside him. James sighed. We've been through a lot, haven't we, boy? Max walked beside him, slower than before, but still strong, still proud. James kneeled, pressing his forehead gently against Max's. You did your job, he whispered, better than anyone ever could. Max wagged his tail slowly, nudging James's hand. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to let go. Part of A Promise Kept. A quiet afternoon, the sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the backyard. A soft breeze rustled the leaves and the world felt calm, almost too calm. Ethan sat on the grass, his arms wrapped around Max, who lay beside him, breathing steadily. The dog's once powerful body now moved slower, his breaths deeper, more measured. Dad says you need to rest more, Ethan murmured, running his fingers gently through Max's fur. That's okay. We can rest together. Max huffed softly, his tail giving a slow wag. James watched from the porch, his heart heavy. He had seen this before with other canines with old partners. The signs were clear. Max was saying goodbye in his own way. A final night that evening, Ethan refused to leave Max's side. James let him stay curled up on the couch, Max's head resting on Ethan's lap, the boy's small hands never leaving his fur. You're my best friend, Ethan whispered, his voice sleepy but full of love. Always. Max let out a soft, content sigh, his eyes half closing. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't on guard. He wasn't protecting anyone. He was simply home. The morning without Max, James woke up before dawn, a feeling of unease settling in his chest. He walked into the living room and stopped. Ethan was still asleep, curled up next to Max. But Max wasn't moving. James took a deep breath, his throat tightening as he approached. He knelt beside them, placing a gentle hand on Max's fur, still warm but lifeless. His heart clenched. Max had gone peacefully, surrounded by the people he had given his life to protect. James swallowed hard and reached out, gently shaking Ethan awake. Buddy, he whispered, his voice soft. Wake up, son. Ethan stirred, blinking drowsily. Huh? Then he looked down. Max? Silence. Ethan's small hands nudged Max aside. Max, wake up, he said again, but his voice cracked. James pulled him into his arms as Ethan's small sobs broke the morning stillness. He was tired, James whispered, holding his son close. He stayed as long as he could. Ethan buried his face in his dad's shoulder, his little body shaking. But I wasn't ready. James swallowed back his own tears. I know, buddy. Neither was I. A hero remembered that evening they buried Max under the big oak tree in the backyard, his favorite spot to nap in the afternoons. Ethan carefully placed Max's worn red bandana on top of the grave. He's still with us, right? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. James nodded, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. Always. Ethan wiped his eyes, then straightened up. He was a good dog. James smiled even as his heart ached. No, son, he was the best. As the sun set behind them, a soft breeze rustled the trees, and for just a moment, they could almost hear the distant echo of paws running through the grass. One last time. The end.